So the next day after I have put out all the mud on the wallboard, you see me sanding everything off. That is the first sand, the final sand after I start filling in all the voids. You see on the left hand side there are some voids, and I just go through and get everything as perfect as possible after the sanding process. If you were using a backer board, a proper backer board, meaning Durarock or any other cement type of backer board, then you would be using thin set, and then you have to be a little more stringent on putting the thin set on, because you're not going to be able to sand thin set. But yeah, there's a straight edge going up there because I need, and I'm marking with a pencil where my voids are at, because that's where I'm going to be doing the feathering of the sheetrock mud. I'm trying to get my wall as plumb and level as possible, which it kind of facilitates putting the tile on, so that you're not ending up, proportionately more thin set in one area than you are the other, and that's the whole point of doing all this prep. The prep actually takes longer than the actual tiling, because we're trying to get things as perfect as possible. Even this bottom area right here, you can see I'm not doing a lot of feathering, but I'm doing enough to get it, to the point where I'm not really having to worry about, any of the, as I said, the excess thin set being glopped on there, because that's not what I want. Are there easier ways to make this happen? Yeah, possibly. Backer board doesn't make it easier necessarily. Backer board, proper backer board, if it was Hardy Backer, Durarock, or any of that stuff, it doesn't make the process easier, because the whole process starts when you're at the wood level, right? Before all the backer board goes up, no matter what you're using, you're trying to get your walls as plumb and true, and yeah, you're trying to get that to happen first before the backer board goes up. But if you can't do that, or if you don't do that, then you have to mitigate all of that with your backer board, and yeah, that's a process. So after this dries, which the second day on this doesn't take long for it to dry. I actually put a fan on it, and I'll go off and do something else. In this case, I'm only doing the shower, not the bathroom, so I'm kind of relegated to not doing anything else. If I got to make a trip to Home Depot, or if I got to do some emails out in the truck or something like that, I'll do that for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then sand that off, which I've already done, and there was no point in showing all that. But all those areas that I feathered out, I came back and sanded later, and everything is as flat and smooth as I can possibly get it. Then I go on to the red guard portion, and again, I shop at Home Depot, so red guard is my default product, but it wouldn't matter if it was Hydroban, Aqua Defense, 8+9. There's probably 8 or 9 different liquid topical membranes out there that you could use. So I don't have a preference one to the other. It's just that I shop at Home Depot. And so yeah, a brush and a roller is my default tools to apply this, and you can see I put tape down there, blue tape down at the floor, so I don't over slop on that, and then I pull it off. By the time my second coat, so you see the corners, and I gotta address this because I have a certain way, everybody has their own way, but I do the corners. You saw the inside of the niche has already been done with a brush. The corners got done with a brush, and then the curve got done with a brush, and then I use a roller. And people ask me what kind of roller, and I'm like, I don't know. I just pick up the cheap one, the one that is not as nappy, because I don't want a bunch of that red guard getting soaked up into the roller and just waste it. So yeah, the less nappy one, the better. I go up to just past the shower head, because I don't see the purpose in going up past the shower head. No moisture or water content is ever going to get into that area, so I'm not concerned about that. But usually I just kind of, especially on the outside part of the shower, where the water is never going to get sprayed on. I don't worry about that too much, but you know, I go up as high as possible, and then I just kind of work it around. I don't know if I show the second coat on this video, but I do, generally speaking, I do 2 coats on the wall, and usually 3 coats in the corners and the curb. Those are the areas, and the niche. Those are the areas where I can see that it would have a more moisture content than the other places. You also see that I used a brush going around the shower valve as well as the shower head. And then it gets overlapped with the roller eventually, because I want it to go up to the edges of that wallboard as much as possible, which is why I use a brush. And really, that's as easy as it gets. I mean, it's like basically you're painting. There are some people who read directions on product, and apparently the directions, I haven't read them even today, on RedGuard says that that you should apply it with some type of sheetrock knife or something like that, and it has a certain mil thickness that you have to adhere to, and blah 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 blah. You know, from the day I started using this stuff, probably 8 years ago, I still haven't read the directions, but this has kind of taught me just OJT, on the job training, on how to apply it properly. And since I have a couple of videos on my channel going back, you know, 5+ years, one of them is painting a cardboard box with RedGuard 2 coats and letting that water sit in that cardboard box for over a week with no damage and no penetration of the RedGuard, only 2 coats. Then about 3 years ago, I did a sheetrock box. I think it was like a 18-inch by 18-inch sheetrock box that I just used caulking in the corners to hold it together, and I painted that with 2 coats of RedGuard. Let that set, I believe it was 19 days. I think it was 19 days. I let that set with water in it, and it was a good amount too. I think it was probably 5 gallons or better, and there was still no penetration into the sheetrock or anything. So I'm very, very confident with this product. Yeah. Although recently I've used Ardex, and I like Ardex. One of the reasons that I don't use Aqua Defense more is because it dries a dark green, and as I'm doing my tiling, I like to have pencil marks on the wall, and I can't see those marks with Aqua Defense. But Ardex dries like a battleship gray, so it makes it much easier to see the pencil marks. And Ardex still has a bit of a fume to it, as RedGuard definitely does, but not quite as much. So yeah, I like Ardex. It's not easily got, and that's why I don't use it more commonly. Also, around that drain, you see there's some white silicone. So I always screed with my finger some white silicone right up under the edge of that drain, and press it down into the shower pan, and then I overlap my RedGuard onto that silicone, because if anything is, if water is going to get anywhere as Achilles heel, it's going to be around that drain area and the perimeter. And that's why I use my brush into that gap that I leave with my wallboard. I use my, I think it's a 5-inch brush I'm using, and I push it into that gap really well so that it hits right where the mortar hits the pan liner around the perimeter. And then of course, like I said, you know, with the, oh wow, I really messed up on that. No, I didn't. No, I'm showing, so yeah, the second coat is done. This is a dry fit. God, I thought I was showing the final. Whew. So I always recommend doing a dry fit with your floor tile, the mosaics, and I call every sheet tile a mosaic, because they're going to require some trimming. And this is what I'm doing there. I'm realizing that my pan liner bumps out a little bit, so I'm kind of trimming off the edges to kind of accommodate for that bump out, and doing the dry fit. And the dry fit for me, well, for anybody for that matter, but for me is very, very important, because by the time I start tiling, I don't want to sit there and try and, oh, I gotta shave part of this part off, or I got to do this, or I got to do that. No, I'm doing all that prior to setting the tile, prior to even putting the thin set, mixing it up. So obviously I needed to cut this one sheet, and again, I'm doing all that cutting and all that stuff because I'm figuring out on my, I think this is, yeah, obviously this is my niche tile, and so I know that I have, you know, a cut to accommodate left and right of that centerpiece on the niche, so I'm doing that ahead of time, and then I can set that over off to the side in kind of a vertical fashion and let all the excess water come off of that. In fact, yeah, you see that I did that inside of all the wrap of it, and there we go, two perfect fit. So I let that, put it over off to the side, those pieces, let them dry out so I'm not contending with the excess water, and worry about that later. This is the faux marble curb top. It's a quartz type of material that my customer picked out because you do have choices with this type of tile. You can do a marble or you can do this quartz, and the quartz is a brighter type of white, and I knew that my niche was skinnier than normal, so I'm just ripping this piece because he wanted the window frame type design, as you see there at the bottom. I thought I was going to show that cut, but I guess I didn't. So that bottom piece kind of jets out like a window, the bottom of a window, and I like that actually. I like it because because my field tile can go up to it. I don't have to do any type of, you know, special cuts with my field tile or anything when I get to that bottom part. So that bottom part gets set in, then the top, and then the sides. I thought I was going to show that cut, but you can just see where it was kind of notched out. And there is no specific size for that notch, you know, I just kind of hoof it. I think that's probably 1.5 inch notch, both left and right. And then I put some thin set on it. This is where I do my, you saw some of the thin set on the back end was a little heavier than the front end, and that's where I get my little slope going on so water sheds off of it. Yeah, any type of horizontal surface you want water to shed off, that would be the curb, the niche, and a bench. And my crappy levels I had to use because my Stabilo, my 24-inch of Stabilo wouldn't fit in there. But I double check my crappy levels because they're crappy. A lot of people will say to do the back end of the niche, your mosaic, if you will, in this case a 2x2. Should you do that first, or should you do the sides of the niche? You know, it doesn't matter. Most niches don't get the tsunami that people think they do. So to me, it's not really that important. In this case, I'm doing all of my back of my 2x2 first, and then I'm doing the sides. But a lot of people feel like the inside part, left, right, top, should be done first, and then the inset part last. It makes it for a little bit more difficult of a cut to get it in there perfect, whereas doing the back first and then doing the sides, you don't have to worry about getting the mosaic cut perfect because of the overlap, the way it's going to go in. I am not troweling this out to get, normally on field tile we're trying to trowel it out so we can collapse the ridges, and that's not the purpose for my trowel here. The purpose for my trowel is to make sure that the thin set is the same going across, and that it's thin, that I don't have like glopped up thin set. So say a 6-inch knife, you know, taping knife or whatever, would not do that for you. So yes, I apply it with that, but then I go ahead and use my trowel. I think it's a little 1/4-inch trowel that I'd used on there, and I do it at a nice sharp 45-degree angle at least. And then I use a float to push all those down so that there's no lippage or anything going on, and get off all the excess thin set. I have a little tiny screwdriver I do that with. You don't want that thin set to dry. The next day it's going to be a lot more difficult to get out of those cracks. Yeah, speaking of my 6-inch taping knife, that is my best buddy. I don't use my trowel, my normal trowel. I know a lot of people use the back of the trowel, the flat end of the trowel, to kind of screed out their thin set. Yeah, I don't do that. I use my 6-inch knife right there. I think I use the same 1/4-inch trowel. In fact, I know I do, on the floor. Again, you're screeding and getting those ridges on there, not for the purpose of collapsing the ridges necessarily, although that's an end result benefit. But you're doing that to get a contiguous screed of your thin set, so that you don't end up glopped up thin set on one end, and then, yeah, that's the reason that I'm using that, the little 1/4-inch trowel. And that cut piece to the right, you saw the first one go in, that was already dried out after I had run it through the wet saw to knock off the corner area. That I set that on end and let it dry out as I'm doing something else, and then it's nice and dry when I go to put it in. And all these pieces are numbered, or they're stacked in such a way that I had already dry fitted them, so that I know when I go in to actually set them that they're in the correct order. I think this piece will actually fit right up under that gap of the wallboard that I left at the curb. Slide right in there. And that's why I like raising my wallboard, besides the wicking action, and that's the whole purpose of raising your wallboard, so there's no contact between your wallboard and your shower pan. But the advantage is then it makes the rest of your floor tile disappear into those gaps, and then your wall tile will overlap onto that. And that should always be the way things are done, although, you know, every tile guy does things different. It's just that makes more sense to me. And you can see clearly there on that drain area where I had brushed my red guard and overlapped onto that white silicone that I had already applied on there. So my areas where water penetration could ever happen are already negated, and never have to worry about what. In fact, I could do a flood test the way it sets now before this tile is on there, and it would pass a flood test without a problem. So that we're not really doing the water in, water out system. So then 3-piece drain with the weep holes and, you know, the pre-slope and all that stuff is not an issue anymore the way that I do these. There is a process out there called the Divot Method, which is in a long roundabout way the way I'm doing this. It's a little more complicated, it's a little more time consuming, and I don't see that there's an advantage to doing a divot system shower pan over the way that I'm doing them. I think the only advantage, they should call it a funnel system, not a divot system. But because it acts like a funnel, any excess water would kind of drain into that funnel area. But I think it would set there below the tile into the thin set, as opposed to the way I'm doing it, where it's all kind of contiguous, where if water gets, well, when water gets into the grout line, that, you know, all it has is the thin set before the red guard, and eventually evaporate the same way that it went in. So same thing, I'm using a float on any mosaic that I use. I would use a float to push down all the tiles so that they're all pushed down into the thin set, and that there's no one tile that's going to be higher or lower than the other. You could use anything, the float is the easiest. And yeah, wipe everything off as you go. Much easier to maintain than trying to clean up everything the next day. This, when I'm cutting out around the drain area, individual tile, as I'm doing here, I don't get to that toward the end of the video, but this is something that I started doing I think from day one, if you go back to my videos 11 years ago, I think I'm still doing the same thing back then that I'm doing now. As a rule, I'm always having my floor tile setting slightly above the drain cap. And I know a lot of people are focused on having their tile and their drain cap flush with each other. I have seen in, walking this planet so long, I have seen tile lower than the drain cap because of whatever, I don't know, subfloor moves, the shower pan material moves downward, whatever, but then you have pooling around the drain area. So I just felt like it was common sense to have that tile setting above the drain cap so that if there's any settling, if there's anything going on, unbeknownst to me years later, and there's some type of pressure pushing down on that pan, that there'll never be an issue of water pooling. I think it gives a better ability for, I think it's easier for water to shed off into the drain with that positive flow going down. And you'll see a little bit later where I'm going to take those individual tile that I've kind of preset there, and I literally cut those in circular fashion. To each one individually gets cut in a circular fashion depending on how it's wrapping around the drain, and then I do a little taper cut on the edge, and the taper cut ensures, as I said, positive water flow going into the drain. See how that slides into the bottom of that gap. I just love that. I just think it's so much of a better way than having it, flush up against the wall. Yeah, making sure that my slope is on point. Yeah, always double and triple and quadruple check everything as you go along. The floor is probably arguably the most important part of a shower because it's always a floor that fails. It's your ankle below. I'm going to say it like that. Well, your calf, okay? So about mid-calf below is always going to be your failure point of a shower, always. It's going to be at the curb, it's going to be at the left and the right of the curb, it's going to be, at the wall, at that, that first tile going down. And so, this area is the most important to get right, not only with regard to waterproofing, but all of your tile and all that stuff. You can imagine all the garbage, from shampoo to soap to, oils of your skin to hair dyes to all of that stuff is going to be squarely on your shower pan material all the time, every day. And that's kind of why I take this area so seriously and take time. It's also a show place, like people are going to look down and see how nicely the tile is done, or conversely how crappy it's done. So I always take time on this, more so than the walls. The walls are kind of boring, but the niche and the floor are kind of the artistic things that we do insofar as building a shower. It's probably a good idea to have a couple of t-shirts or sponges, dry sponges and stuff like that, to sponge off the excess water off of these mosaics. I don't always have that, which is why you just saw me wipe it on my pants, because you don't want to put a totally wet tile onto that thin set. Yeah, we're getting ready to wrap this up. I kind of already went through the explanation of those individual tiles around the drain, so I'm not going to talk too much more about that. I will talk about that toilet off to the left with the pee in it. I should have flushed that or closed the lid. Sorry about that, folks. But yeah, make sure that your floor, if this is a DIY project, if you're a homeowner and you're going to tackle this, you don't have to follow the way that I've done it on my video necessarily, but just keep the basics in mind. you want a completely waterproof pan area, so that there's no possibility of water penetration into your pan area, which would beget potentially a failure in the future. That left and the right of the curb, I think previously I talked about the dam corners. That left and right of the curb are the reason dam corners started being sold. You can make your own out of the PVC liner, but at the end of the day, you see how the curb and the walls are kind of flow contiguous, and the curb and the walls are 100% waterproof, which is why I don't use the dam corners. The dam corners came out because of all the failures that we have left and right of the curb, and you know, that was some type of way to mitigate those failures. But to me, as I said before in a previous video, if water sees your dam corners, you've already failed your shower. So the way that I do it, I 100% make sure that water never gets into those left and right side by having the surface waterproof. So that is your first line of defense. The tile is arguably your first line of defense, because obviously a lot of tile out there, especially the larger porcelain, is definitely waterproof. So yeah, you could say that tile is your first line of defense, especially with that contiguous curb top that I put on. In this case, it'll be a quartz. Same material I put in the niche will be the curb top on this shower. And so that is my first line of defense. My second line of defense is a red guard. And then nothing will get through that. But if it should, for whatever reason, then you have your pan liner as a backup. Oh, and by the way, because I get the question a lot, what about your grout? No, your grout is not your waterproofer. Caulking arguably would be waterproofer in the corners, change of planes and stuff like that, but especially on a vertical surface, I don't really see that as an issue. By the way, I don't do any caulking in my showers when I leave. I think you're buying a problem that generates a solution into the future, meaning that every year, 2 years, or 3 years, you're going to have to cut out all that caulking you put in, which is a real pain, and then re-caulk. And especially with some of these texture tile, it becomes a real hassle to take all that out. So I'm not into the caulking thing unless there's a reason for it. If you have cracking in the future of grout line, then yeah, put some caulking in there, but otherwise I don't do that. Here is where I'm fashioning out the individual tile, taking out the little excess thin set as I push those individual into the thin set, you know, doing a little cleanup as I go. But yeah, just takes time. Make that little circular cut, you know, like I did there. Put a little taper on it, you know, back butter. Even the small tile, do a little back butter. You want that thin set on your floor, there I go, back butter the tile. Even the little tiny ones, make sure that they're set in there very, very well. Push them down very well. You know, you don't want a failure of any of this tile ever. And then, you know, a little screwdriver doing the clean out between the grout lines. Much better to do it when the thin set is wet than the next day. But yeah, that's basically it. I think we're winding down on this portion, and then we'll get on to the next portion, which will be the wall tile. Look how long it takes me. Make a little pencil mark in a circular fashion around there. Yeah, it kind of drives me crazy sometimes, especially with some of the, you know, the basket weave thatch type of marble tile with the little black dots in them. Oh my god, those are so hard to get around a drain. You know, but the payoff is worth it. I think it's a nice clean look afterward. And again, that positive water flow that I'm going to get, or the customer gets, going forward. Yeah, so we're going to move on to the wall tile in the next portion, and you get to see me throw a wall tile up on the wall. Fun. Hey, if you enjoyed that video and you learned something, consider being a Patreon member. $5, $10, $15 a month would help me greatly produce more videos. I make nothing from YouTube at all. If you're going to call me for advice, please donate $50 for 30 minutes. My link to my PayPal and my Patreon account is down below. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you get immediate notifications as soon as I post videos. And thank you very much for your support.